e aqui é muito gratificante dividir o espaço com a Maria, para mostrar que a agenda da aviação, a gente brinca que não existe concorrência. A nossa concorrência é no aeroporto, mas na transição energética, na mitigação de impactos da nossa atividade econômica, a gente trabalha muito juntos. Então, nesse sentido, eu dou início ao painel, e esse é um painel que foi preparado e tem um caráter muito especial, porque pela primeira vez nós poderemos dividir os resultados de um estudo, de um roadmap que foi desenvolvido pela Associação Latino-Americana de Aviação Civil, com resultados importantes, com achados importantes, e é um primeiro passo dentro da nossa estratégia nessa etapa, onde existem marcos legais importantes sendo discutidos. Nós soubemos que hoje, no Brasil, daqui a pouco, o Ministério de Minas e Energia fará o lançamento, agora às 10h30, da consulta pública sobre o SAF, então já existe uma minuta de decreto, e dentro dessa etapa, esse estudo trará para nós algumas reflexões importantes e a gente pretende dividir com vocês agora. Então, dando início, vou passar a palavra para a Laís. Obrigada.
Oi, me ouve?
Acho que a gente pode começar com uma rodada de breves apresentações e a gente passa para as perguntas.
Tá bem. Sou Laís Tomás, chefe de gabinete na Secretaria de Petróleo, Gás e Biocombustíveis. O secretário Renato está nessas agendas que a Maria Luísa mencionou. Eu agradeço muito o convite da Latam de participar desse debate e estar nesse painel com colegas de alto nível. Como a Maria mencionou, a gente está num dia de muitos anúncios, né? Vamos fazer a consulta pública do decreto do SAF e do CCS, os dois serão lançados agora, e a gente conta muito com vocês, com os stakeholders. Desde a criação do combustível do futuro, ainda quando não existia a lei, quando ele estava como um GT, a participação do setor privado, das organizações internacionais, foi fundamental para a gente construir conjuntamente o capítulo do ProBioQAV. E esse capítulo, ele foi para o Congresso Nacional, no projeto de lei, e ele não teve alteração de mérito. Então, mostra o quanto que a gente conseguiu diálogo e buscando consensos. E tratando de América Latina, o nosso Ministério tem buscado muito incentivar as parcerias com Chile, com Colômbia. A gente está buscando o apoio, né, das organizações como o BID, para pensar como fazer harmonização regulatória também. A gente avança agora no decreto, outros países podem olhar o que a gente fez e se inspirar, ou podem também apontar outras alternativas que a gente possa aprimorar. Então, assim, especificamente, penso que para a gente conseguir a harmonização regulatória é um caminho importante. A gente olhar a questão da certificação também de aspectos regionais. A gente sabe que muitas das vezes as certificações vêm prontas, né, dos países mais desenvolvidos, e a gente tem capacidade de inovação dentro do país para buscar também olhar para a região, os potenciais, e fazer aprimoramentos de certificação. E eu entendo que um ponto importante que eu queria deixar aqui também é a questão da facilitação de comércio. Então, uma vez que a gente tenha um sistema de book and claim, por exemplo, regional, a gente pode avançar muito no suprimento da cadeia produtiva do SAF, o que obviamente ajuda a gente a torná-lo mais economicamente viável. Então, a gente vai levar para a OMC a criação de um número específico do sistema harmonizado para o SAF. E isso vai precisar do apoio também de vocês. A gente sabe que os timelines, né, da OMC são diferentes, então só em 2033, a gente levando a discussão agora, que a gente vai conseguir esse número específico para a gente falar que está comercializando SAF, porque hoje quem vende SAF vende como jet fuel ou como HVO. E se a gente não tem o produto, a gente não consegue benefícios tributários. Então a minha ideia é incentivar cada vez mais o secretário, o Ministério, o ministro Alexandre, para a gente conseguir. Eu vou ter que pedir desculpas para os painelistas, vou ter que sair para o nosso lançamento do decreto, mas fico aqui à disposição e o secretário Renato volta às 5 horas da tarde para abrir mais, a gente conversar mais sobre o decreto. Então, agradeço mais uma vez, Maria, pelo convite e fico à disposição, o Ministério está à disposição de vocês. Obrigada.
Laís, obrigada. A Laís compartilhou agora a informação Mais tarde, às 17 horas, nós temos um outro painel com a participação do secretário. Nós estaremos presentes e vai ser bastante oportuno. Parece que foi escolhido. Muito obrigada. Bom painel. Então, continuando, passo a palavra para o Julio, para que ele possa fazer uma breve apresentação.
Sí, buen día, buenos días. Entiendo que hay traducción
Sim,
para español.
espanhol e inglês, pode elegir.
Which channel should people use?
Sí, puede hablar inglés o español.
Inglés o
Hay
español.
traducción.
English better? English better?
Continua o painel e pede ajuda ali para eles ajustarem.
Ok, bueno, puedo decir algo tal vez
Obrigada.
en español. Sí,
Puede elegir de verdad, hay traducción.
ok, sí, ok. Veo que hay algunas personas que hablan español o que entienden español en el público, así que puedo hablar en español.
Sí.
Entonces, bueno, mi nombre es Julio Cordano, yo soy director de Medio Ambiente,
No, puede continuar, perdón.
sí, Cambio Climático y Océanos del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de Chile, y estoy muy agradecido por la invitación. El tema que nos convoca hoy día es un tema muy importante. Como sabemos, las emisiones que provienen del sector de la aviación son particularmente importantes a nivel internacional. Afortunadamente hemos tenido avances importantes en ICAO o ASI en español, y tenemos un marco ya bajo CORSIA, donde Chile ha participado muy intensamente y muy activamente en su construcción. Y además tenemos en Chile, por supuesto, una industria de aviación muy significativa, y especialmente a través de empresas como Latam, pero por supuesto hay otras también. Y eso nos pone en una situación de particular interés, considerando que todo forma parte de un esfuerzo por cumplir los objetivos del Acuerdo de París. De ese punto de vista, también tenemos que considerar cuáles son las medidas adecuadas para incentivar justamente la... ¿Sí? ¿Sí? ¿Bien?
Sí, sí.
¿Sí? Justamente cuáles son las medidas específicas de la industria para incentivar la descarbonización. Y aquí entran varias cosas. Por supuesto está, por una parte, las mejoras técnicas que tienen que tener lugar, la renovación de flotas, que son procesos que ya están ocurriendo, y sabemos que en la región de América Latina hay una renovación de flotas de aviones muy avanzada. Es tal vez una de las regiones con flota más moderna del mundo, y eso nos pone también en una situación de ventaja, pero al mismo tiempo nos pone en una oportunidad para avanzar en otras áreas, como por ejemplo los Sustainable Aviation Fuels o los SAF, donde hay una intensa discusión específicamente, y lo que decía nuestra colega de Brasil, para encontrar los incentivos económicos para una penetración más rápida justamente de los SAF. Ahí entra justamente lo que pensamos que es una oportunidad, y que es la colaboración regional. Porque Chile es un mercado que ha crecido en los últimos años, sobre todo después de la pandemia. Ya hemos recuperado incluso bastante de lo que ocurrió después de la pandemia, pero no somos un mercado suficientemente grande como para poder tener una demanda por este tipo de combustibles que nos permita hacer una transición más rápida. Y ahí, por supuesto, la alianza con Brasil, la alianza con Colombia, la alianza con otros países relevantes de tamaño significativo en la región puede ser muy importante para crear una demanda, que además debe ser complementada con una segunda dimensión de esto. No solamente un tema de demanda, es también un tema de creación de instrumentos para canalizar esa demanda. Y ahí entra la discusión de cómo podemos en la región desarrollar sistemas de flexibilidad, de bonos de compensación y de uso de mecanismos de mercado. Y ahí, por supuesto, hay mucho por avanzar. Hemos tenido reuniones a nivel regional. Recientemente en Viña del Mar, en Chile, tuvimos una reunión regional para hablar de este tipo de cosas, para comparar nuestros instrumentos de mercado, y creemos que hay un camino muy interesante y que puede ofrecer muchas oportunidades para seguir avanzando en ese camino.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Alastair. Presentation for you. And
And this question as well? And this question as well?
Yes.
Is this working okay? Espero que no importa si hablo en inglés, pero es un poco más fácil para mí. So it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alistair. I work for a consultancy called ICF, and we've been doing a huge amount of work with Alta over the last almost a year now, working on the sustainable aviation roadmap for the Latin America region. So looking both in, looking at all 43 countries, so across the entire region, but with a very specific focus on some of the larger countries, and particularly Brazil, where we are, and Chile as well. And the focus of that roadmap has really been across 5 main areas. So firstly, looking at the growth in the region. Secondly, looking at the fleet that's being used. Thirdly, looking at the operational efficiency, so how well you're using those aircraft. And then looking at the use of SAF as one of the key measures in sector to reduce emissions. And then beyond that, the use of carbon credits and carbon mechanisms to abate emissions. And maybe just kind of going through them very quickly as well is, I think the first point that is important that we don't miss is that the entire aviation market in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's very different to where we're seeing a lot of the sustainable policies being implemented. So today we see a lot of the policies being led by regions like Europe and the US, and they're much larger markets. So to give an example of that, in America at the moment, they have half as many people and they fly about 3.7 times more. So for every flight that someone is taking in Latin America, the equivalent person in North America and the US would be flying about 6 times in a year. So there's a huge amount of growth that is just very important for connectivity, for the economy, and even just to kind of be on equivalent levels. And of course the US is expecting to grow beyond that as well. So that initial point is that the decarbonization has to be balanced with that absolute requirement for economic growth and connectivity in the region. But luckily, as we see that growth, a lot of that will be done with newer aircraft coming into the fleet, and those new aircraft are much more fuel efficient than previous ones. So every new aircraft is normally about 22% more efficient generation on generation. So as you bring in a newer fleet, that substantially reduces emissions. And Latin America today flies one of the youngest and most fuel efficient fleets in the world, more fuel efficient than I believe Europe and the US, for example. And so that's a huge advantage. But even with newer aircraft and kind of operating them as efficiently as possible, you still have to look at additional measures. But with those aircraft, like the biggest opportunity that exists today is around the operational improvements, and so making sure that those aircraft are being used as efficiently as possible. By our calculations in the roadmap, we think that you could get about a 6% improvement in efficiencies with those operational efficiencies, and that might not sound very large, but a really important element of that is that a lot of those efficiencies can be captured today. So with the right support, both for airports, for ANSPs, for governments, 6% today is much more impactful than deploying SAF in 2048, for example. So? No, I know.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then the last elements is the SAF and the carbon credits, and the mix of those obviously has a big impact. But we'll go back to questions.
Thank you. And now, Maria, if you could give a brief introduction about you, and also start with the questions, but please.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here with all of you, and thank you for attending. I know it's been hard to get into the venue. So I'm Maria Whittaker. I'm the Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer for the Abra Group. We are the holding company for GOL Airlines. Some of you might have flown us here, Avianca and Wamos, and we, as with everyone, our sort of sustainability is definitely part of our sort of DNA and what we do. Strategically, we focus on operational efficiencies. We have demonstrated, we announced recently that over the last 5 years, we reduced our emissions intensity by nearly 15%, and we're very proud of that. And we have done that through a mixture of new fleets. So we've done vast investments in new fleets across the region, and also in fuel efficiency programs. And and the way we run our operation in general. So that's been a tremendous effort, and we're very proud of those achievements, because as we enter the next phase of sustainability, we can think carefully about, okay, what makes sense? Because from our perspective, we want to democratize air travel, we want to make sure that Latin America is connected, and we want to make sure that we do that sustainably. And there's trade-offs in that dialogue. So going forward, then, what we've been doing is we've been working with our colleagues in Latam and the other airlines in this roadmap to help us all as an industry understand, okay, what are the trade-offs? What are the important things for each government? What does each country need to do to make themselves in the best possible position to maybe export SAF, but also really look after connectivity and make sure that we continue flying, that we continue all being able to come to Belém, and we sustain the growth and development that we need in a fair way. So in that dialogue, we are prioritizing sort of 3 topics. So from our perspective, collaboration is essential. So we need to all work together to really drive the solutions. We need BNDES, we need the Ministry of Finance, but we also need the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Mines and Energy to all work together with us to identify the solutions. The second thing is we need incentives for the consumption of SAF. The dialogue so far has focused on incentives to production. Incentives to production are shown that do not translate into the end price of SAF being lower. So in Europe, we are all paying 5 times the price of jets. And I don't know if you're aware, but the cost of jet in Brazil for us airlines is 40% of our operating costs. That is a chunky number for in any industry, and we don't have a lot of freedom in terms of where we buy the jets or how we buy it. So if we consider that the cost of SAF is going to be at least 3 times more jets, then we need to think about how we're going to pay for that. And we need a mix of measures. We cannot only do fiscal incentives, because that's never going to be enough, because we still have 3 times the cost of jets. So we do need fiscal incentives, and we need incentives to the demand of SAF, but we also need collaboration. So today we're working, and we've announced that we're working with our partners at Sumitomo, and we're delighted to do that, and very proud on that, to progress and a structure to finance SAF, where the developed countries help us finance SAF in the developing countries. And we're going to talk more about that later, but what we want to say is we need a mix of solutions. We need to all work together on that, and we need to focus on the price of SAF. How do we reduce that, and how do we get support from developed countries, support from the government, support from the region? And I love the idea of the integration in the region, because that's also super important from our perspective. The third topic we are concerned about as APR Group is to make sure that the SAF we produce in the region is truly sustainable. We don't want a race to the bottom in price, because that will mean that we forget about water and nature. We cannot only focus on carbon, because this region has tremendous assets in terms of biodiversity, and we have critical assets for the world. We need to make sure that we are protecting those, and the airlines have a contribution to make. So we can contribute in ensuring, being the guardians, that the SAF we're producing is high quality and for export, and that we avoid the temptation to go low cost and sort of anything goes. And then we can also contribute by, as Alistair has said, there's the mix of SAF, and when maybe we support nature-based solutions in the process of getting that decarbonization, because in order to protect connectivity, we might need to do everything. So in that, the panoply of solutions, we want to ensure that we are investing in nature-based solutions too. So those are the comments. You had a question. Would you want me to answer the question now or later?
No, we're going to start the questions
Fine.
now.
Okay.
So, okay, let's start with you. So, according to what we have been discussed, could you mention for us what was the main reason that made Alta invest such a huge time and also a huge investment on the development of the roadmap and this research?
Absolutely. For Alta, for all of our airlines, it was important that our voice is heard, and that also we brought data and information about the region. We need solutions that are appropriate for the region we operate in. And there are complex solutions, there's a lot of technical challenges, and we needed to shine some light. It's the beginning of a dialogue, but we needed to shine some light on the challenges we face, the trade-offs we face, and really engage with our governments and legislations, because we're all struggling, because also we're all having to talk to people we're not used to talking. So we have to talk to agriculture and to biofuels producers. It's new. So we want to bring in information and knowledge and dialogue. So that was the main reason why it's extremely important. And as Maria said, this is the beginning. And we are providing information, and we want to work and collaborate with everyone, producers, governments, and everyone, to make sure we get to the right solution quickly. Also, we don't have a lot of time.
Thank you. So, taking that, Alistair, the roadmap indicates that the region requires our own decarbonization, but in a harmonized way. Could you share with us, in your opinion, or at ICF point of view, what are the main obstacles that must to be discussed, and also the potential for collaboration between Latin America countries, how it can be done?
Sure. And so I think you can maybe split that into a couple of different areas. So I'd say one to begin with is just the ability on the aviation side. So when we look at the decarbonization, we do tend to look at Europe and the US as the regions leading it, and there tends to sometimes be an assumption that the mechanisms that are being used there and work there are applicable everywhere else in the world, and that's just not true. Like the US and Europe they're very rich countries, very rich regions. They have an extremely mature aviation industries. People there fly a lot. They have a very developed fossil fuel sectors and very developed renewable fuel sectors, and a lot of those things are different in Latin America. So the aviation industry is a lot smaller. Like that example that the average person in the US flies 6 times more than the average person in Latin America. The average person here is also a lot more sensitive to cost increases. So that kind of cost pass-through is a really interesting and really important component of it. And so there's much less ability to kind of pass those costs through in the way that the European regulation particularly is focused on doing. And there would be a much greater impact if those costs were passed through, especially on connectivity. When we look at Europe, I live in Madrid. I can get a train back to the UK if I want, but there's fewer alternatives, and the Latin America region is split up with mountains, with forests, with rivers, and that makes transport a lot more difficult without aviation. In many cases, there are no alternatives. But then on the fossil fuel sector as well, there's a scarcity of refining capacity. We see there's a net export of crude products in Latin America, but net import of refined products. And that's the opposite in Europe. So actually a lot of the SAF production that's being made in Europe today has been done by retrofitting existing facilities. So taking an existing oil refinery and either retrofitting it or co-processing in it. And so if there's not a scarcity of refinery capacity in the same way, that does make it a little bit harder to scale supply in the short term. And then the final one is the size of the biofuel sector. So Brazil is an exception. There's a huge ethanol industry in Brazil. But if you look in the Europe and US, Europe uses about 50% more biofuels as a percentage of oil products. The US almost twice as much. And so there's a lot more expertise to build on. And so when we see it, none of those obstacles are impossible, but it means that the timing would look a little bit different. And so we would see it as there being more of a progression of scaling the biofuel sector, especially on road, kind of building the expertise, the infrastructure, and developing the foundational elements of it. Potentially exporting as well to the very high value markets. Like Europe has no expectation that Europe will be producing all of the biofuel that's being used, and indeed today UK in particular actually has a road mandate, and 90% of that road mandate is met with biofuels that are imported either as a feedstock or as a finished fuel. And so there's a huge demand for imported SAF and renewable products into Europe as well. And so that gives a potential source of demand to the emerging supply in Latin America without penalizing that connectivity. And then kind of in the future, as those industries develop, as the cost is reduced, that can then be scaled into kind of Latin American carriers as well. And so I would see it as less of challenges, but more that the solutions that are being used in other parts of the world aren't applicable because there's very different circumstances. But it's more that the scheduling and the order that things are taken and the focus on different areas would look a little bit different.
Thank you. And Julio, desde el 2023 sabemos que Chile ha empezado a hacer acuerdos bilaterales, están invirtiendo bastante en esas relaciones, En el senso de hacer una implementación nacional del artículo 6. ¿Podrías compartir con nosotros un poco de esta estrategia? ¿Cómo miras cuando ves en la región? ¿Cuál sería la estrategia para que Chile esté como es un protagonista importante, pero que también esté alineado con esta coordinación y que podamos continuar caminando juntos para una integración regional?
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Chile ha tenido una participación bastante activa en los mercados de carbono en general y desde el comienzo. Incluso si uno ve hacia atrás en el proceso del protocolo de Kioto, Chile estaba entre los 10 países que más usó el protocolo de Kioto en el mundo, en los países en desarrollo, claro. Y eso dio la oportunidad de tener una capacidad, un sector privado familiarizado con los mecanismos de carbono y además con, como digo, capacidad y conocimiento para para implementar las metodologías asociadas a los mecanismos de carbono. Más recientemente, en el caso del Acuerdo de París y el artículo 6, Chile ha también desarrollado una estrategia, tenemos una regulación interna ya aprobada a nivel nacional para la implementación del artículo 6. Nosotros en nuestra NDC hemos reconocido que los instrumentos de carbono y específicamente el artículo 6 pueden ser útiles, pueden ser un instrumento para aumentar la ambición, a pesar de que los objetivos de reducción de emisiones que están en la NDC hoy día en Chile no contemplan, no se espera que se alcancen a través del artículo 6, van a ser con esfuerzo nacional. Dicho eso, nos pone una presión adicional porque la NDC de Chile es muy ambiciosa. Por lo tanto, el uso del artículo 6 debe ser hecho con cuidado justamente para no afectar nuestra capacidad de cumplir con nuestras propias producciones de emisión. Ahora, dicho eso, creo que es importante hacer una referencia que es relevante para el sector del transporte aéreo internacional, porque el transporte aéreo internacional no entra en los inventarios nacionales de gases de efecto invernadero. Y eso es una particularidad que hace que el uso de mecanismos de mercado sea distinto a otros sectores de la economía que sí están dentro de los inventarios nacionales y que por lo tanto sí se contabilizan para la reducción de emisiones y para el objetivo que está en las NDC. Pienso que tal vez hay una conversación sobre cómo los gobiernos pueden facilitar e incentivar el desarrollo de mercados voluntarios. Puede ser también relevante, que tengan buena integridad ambiental, que sean transparentes, que no haya doble contabilidad. Los mismos criterios que se utilizan para los ITMOs bajo el artículo 6 del Acuerdo de París deberán ser también implementados en los mercados voluntarios, que puede ser algo también muy relevante, ya que no implica lo que llaman el ajuste correspondiente en el artículo 6, que puede dar mucha más flexibilidad a ese tipo de intercambio. Y lo último que quiero decir es que quiero recoger una cosa que se señaló, y es que la descarbonización de la industria aérea puede ser extremadamente importante, no solamente por su contribución a los objetivos del Acuerdo de París, sino que por lo que se señaló de que pueden ser un flujo de financiamiento para soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. O sea, en Brasil, por ejemplo, la principal fuente de emisiones es la deforestación. Entonces, la conservación de la naturaleza puede ser una contribución enorme para la sostenibilidad de la región y también para los acuerdos, para el Acuerdo de París. Y en Chile no es distinto. En Chile hay un déficit enorme de financiamiento para la naturaleza. Entonces, creo que ahí esa unión puede ser fundamental.
Pero no se excluye nuestra responsabilidad, sobre eso. Recién el presidente Boric vino a Brasil. El trabajo que ha sido hecho en conjunto con Brasil fue espectacular, de discusiones, de debates. Estamos trabajando muy juntos con los dos ministerios porque sabemos que hay un camino común bastante importante también para lograr la integración regional. Entonces, tuvimos el retraso por el panel. Debemos partir, sí, para terminar. ¿Se podrían decir pocas palabras antes que terminemos una pequeña conclusión?
See, yes, so in terms of what are the three things we want, or what are we asking for, is first, there are things we can do now, and we are asking governments to help us with operational efficiencies in air traffic control in the region. because even cutting 10 minutes off a flight means less cost and less emissions. And those are things that we need, and we're happy to work with governments to find financing for those solutions and really think them through so that we have a air traffic control, sort of the skies are as efficient as possible for all of us. That's the first one. The second one is we love the idea of nature-based solutions. We with Sumitomo are working on Article 6 idea for SAF financing, and we want to promote the idea that airlines can contribute in different ways. It's not just SAF, and we also don't want to. We need to protect connectivity, and nature-based solutions is an obvious one, and we can contribute around the region on that. And then the third one is on the SAF discussion. Let's work together to identify what were the solutions that were implemented in hydrogen, right? There's double auctions, there's revenue certainty mechanisms, there's tax, there's incentives, there's Article 6. We need to find those solutions collectively, and we need a bit of imagination and say, okay, how do we do a transition where we are supporting the SAF market without killing connectivity and with both protecting connectivity, and we bring solutions that are proven. Let's not forget that the land transport using biofuels has been around for 30 years, right? It's a mature market. We are trying to innovate in 5 different directions all at once, and it is very hard. And every market, every renewable energy market had support for the demand side. So we need to now sort out the support for the demand side, and that's what we're engaging as ALTA and with governments, and particularly in Brazil, where there's been a very strong push on the producer side, but now we need to talk about the price of SAF and how do we make this viable, for all, and sort of working together. So those are the 3 conclusions from our side. Thank you.
Looking to the future, could you give us one word to summarize what it would look to the future?
Collaboration.
Thank you. Julio?
Yes, also collaboration. I think clearly there is an opportunity here for integration. Latin America has not been very good at integrating among our own countries. I think this is an opportunity for private and public and private partnerships, and definitely this is something that we don't need to be everybody in the same page, in the sense that every single country of the region can join, but not everybody need to be joining from the get-go. So maybe we can create a space, and maybe others will join later. But I think it's very important that these countries that we have been discussing, they provide the leadership and they create a space that everybody else can join. So I think it's a great opportunity for integration in the region.
Thank you. And one word, collaboration, or?
And sustainability, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, Alistair, a few words for us to conclude, please.
I would break the trend there of going for collaboration, I think, but I think maybe just the point I would make is the starting point is always working out what the objective is. And I think this has been a lot of the challenges that we've seen in Europe, is that in the biofuel and the decarbonization policies that we have, you can always balance 3 things. You're trying to balance the speed of decarbonization, the price of it, and the energy security side as well. So how much of it you're doing in your country or at home. And a lot of the challenges that are happening in Europe at the moment actually are because we're shifting some of that priority from decarbonization towards the energy security. And that kind of reflects with a greater desire to make more of the product at home, and trying to change the intention of a policy or a strategy halfway through implementation is really difficult. And so I would say that one of the most important things I would look for is that really clear idea of what the intention is setting out, and trying to find that balance between the economic growth of creating the jobs, creating the economic opportunities, balancing that with the impact on passengers and connectivity, as well as the imperative to decarbonize, and that mixture of different mechanisms. And so I think that objective, I think, is one of the most exciting and interesting questions, and it will look different in every country, for every government, for every population that is looking to achieve a different thing.
Thank you. Can you give us one word?
I'm going to go for collaboration, but actually from a slightly different perspective, because for someone living in Europe, we see collaboration as well between the developed and developing countries. I think is a really the other kind of element to that collaboration, both within Latin American countries, but the mechanisms like Finvest and other elements that are developing to to use funding from richer countries that are looking to access supply and economic opportunities, and then to use that to kind of create facilities, to create production, to support carbon mechanism projects. There's an increasing appetite and increasing ability to do that, both through Article 6, through import and export, and the growing trade and flow of SAF. So I would go for collaboration on that international perspective.
It was a privilege to moderate this panel. We had many challenges to arrive here. We had problems with the translations. We started in Portuguese. We spoke Spanish, English. So, but it shows that also when the discussion is genuine, when we have the main objectives, and when we work in collaboration, we can discuss, we can talk about how to be well succeed in the sustainability agenda. So thank you for your time, thank you for your patience, and have a good day to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.